My stereophotography and Stereoview collection are two sides of the same coin for me and have a common origin story. Travel back with me to May 2014, London, a chance encounter on a canal boat, a question asked, an answer given, my life transformed. I had boarded a canal boat in Little Venice, not far from the Paddington train station. The area is crowded and full of cheer. It is the annual canal cavalcade. Little do I realize that during this short boat trip, I will be transformed from a 2D photographer to a 3D one. On the boat, I saw another photographer taking pictures too, but with what looked like a pair of binoculars attached to his camera. Curious, I asked him what it was. He said he was shooting 3D. I immediately realized that creating my own 3D images would give a being there immersiveness to my own photographs and would be easy to share with others. As I began learning this new photographic skill, I also researched what was done in the past. It was then that I began to discover that the biggest Stereoview companies had created box sets in addition to individual cards. The box sets were an innovation of the Underwood and Underwood Company, beginning around 1900, and were a radical departure from what had been done previously. Instead of selling cards individually, or as part of a genre series, they sold groups of images together that were contained in a box that resembled a book on a shelf. The images and textual descriptions at times contain cultural biases and prejudices that today sound very offensive. But they also provide cultural insights in their own right about the photographers and the publishers of these images. I often wonder if the subjects of these photos would agree with how their story was getting told. A stereo card typically has a title on the front describing the scene. Furthermore, a card from a box set likely has a number on the front indicating its position in the set. These cards might also have additional text on the back to provide even more details about the scene. Note that Keystone added GPS coordinates to this card. Some of these sets also had a companion book that provided even more detail about each image in the set. For me, they read like I am there on that trip too. My tour guide explains what I am seeing with each image and points out things of interest I might not have first noticed. Specific aspects of the culture are highlighted, such as clothing or aspects of occupations and even songs. Things that are outside of the view of the stereo card are also pointed out. Just by looking at the location where each image in the set was taken, the viewer can map out the photographer's route. What stands out for me when I've done that was how arduous and how much time was spent on these journeys to create the images in some of these box sets. In a time before traveling by plane or car existed, the photographers had to rely on ships to arrive at their destinations and for local travel as well. Where trains existed, they were used. Presumably, horses or other animal transport with wagons was used for overland travel. The photographer had to transport along these routes heavy cameras and the fragile and precious glass plates used for capturing the images of these remote areas. James Mccalton, shown in this image, was a primary photographer for Underwood and Underwood. During his 20 years working for them, he traveled completely around the world 6 times, with no fewer than 43 crossings of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. He took tens of thousands of images for the company depicting notable places, the local population, and their customs, and frontline views of war. He often took the least traveled routes, identifying himself as a traveler and not a tourist. Before working for them, Mccalton had already traveled extensively, including an 800-mile solo walk through northern Russia in 1886. His travels came to the attention of Thomas Edison, who hired him in 1888 to travel around the world to help with his research to create an incandescent lamp. In 1891, at the age of 47, Mccalton began a new career as a full-time traveling photographer for Underwood and Underwood, which included being a war correspondent on the front lines during the Boer War, the Spanish-American War, where this image shows a real battle scene and is not a recreation of one. The Boxer Uprising in China, where this image seems designed to produce outrage at atrocities committed by the Boxers against children. And the Russian-Japanese War, where Mccalton became world famous for his stereo image of the firing of a Japanese artillery cannon and capturing its projectile in flight from the weapon. He did this even as his position was under heavy fire from Russian artillery. This is a portion of Map 4 of the Underwood China box set. Sometimes the companion books for the box sets contain maps, utilizing a system developed specifically for them. The location of where each photograph was taken was provided, as well as the direction the photographer was facing. The circle 11 at the bottom shows from where image 11 was taken. The area between the two lines extending from it shows the scene captured on the card. And this is image 11, whose photographed position we just saw on the map. The scale of production by Underwood and Underwood was tremendous. By 1901, they were publishing 25,000 stereo views per day, which translates to more than 7 million a year. The sets were sold door to door by salesmen. The success of Underwood and Underwood with their box sets resulted in other publishers of stereo views starting to create their own box sets. However, by 1915, the Keystone View Company had bought out most of these competitors. When Underwood and Underwood sold their negatives to Keystone between 1921 and 1923, Keystone was left as essentially the only major publisher of stereo views in the world. In 1933, Keystone began producing what were called Keystone Junior sets. Instead of having two photo images affixed to a thick curved card, these cards were smaller size photo prints with the sets containing 25 views. Keystone ended its regular production of stereo cards in 1939, though it continued to produce optometry-related sets under the name Keystone Eye Comfort Series. These sets were prescribed by doctors for patients who were having difficulty with the coordination of their two eyes working together, interfering with their ability to read and other close-up work. They provided different exercises to restore the ability of the eyes to coordinate. This card is from their beta unit. I also have the Alpha, Gamma, Delta, and Epsilon series and the stereoscope made for these exercises. I have box sets created by each of the major stereo view companies of the time. That is, Underwood and Underwood, Keystone, H.C. White, and the Stereo Travel Company. Each set varies in size. My largest has 100 cards, but Keystone created even larger collections for its Tour of the World set, with the most common version having 600 cards and the largest having 1,200 cards. I have the smallest version with 72 cards. Some box sets were updated with new images, to replace old images with better ones, to expand the geographic scope of a box set, or to keep them current. This one shows President Theodore Roosevelt. And this card shows the next president, William Howard Taft. Some of the box sets in my collection cover entire continents, like South America, Australia, and Africa. Other sets are country-specific, like the United States. In Canada, Ireland, France, Germany, Norway. And Russia. Italy. Egypt. Burma. And Japan. Other sets have subsets, like the Jaffa to Jerusalem subset of the Palestine set, and the Bern and the Bernese Alps subset of the Switzerland set. Well, one of my newest acquisitions, the Bombay to Kashmir subset of the India set. I have other box sets that are thematic and site-specific. This one is about real children in many lands. This set is about Niagara Falls. Notice that the card was hand-tinted and is not black and white. The Cowboys Box Set shows cowboys at work, cowboys doing entertainment, and cowboys in rodeos. This famous English cathedral set shows them from both the outside and on the inside. This box set about birds was one of the biggest surprises for me. Not only are the cards in the set hand-tinted, but much to my surprise, they are living birds, not preserved models. I think this geometry set shows the greater clarity that viewing things in 3D can bring. I am fascinated by how these different publishers chose to portray each of these places and the resulting mental portrait these images and words created for their viewers. But they prompted questions for me too. Why did the photographer go to certain places? Why did the photographer choose to photograph what he did? Why did he think there would be an audience who would want to see those specific places and find them interesting? What did these choices say about the photographer, the viewing audience, their values, etc.? What agenda existed for this whole thing beyond giving a tour of foreign places? For example, did they reinforce a cultural superiority? What did the people in these images think of this foreigner amongst them? Were they curious? Antagonistic? And the photographers who traveled the world to bring us these remarkable images are essentially anonymous, their names unknown. They traveled to places where they almost surely didn't know the language and customs. Possessing a limited amount of photographic glass plates, they were entrusted with capturing the essence each place, a single image at a time, to a viewing audience who might spend their entire lives in the town of their birth. The danger these anonymous photographers were willing to put themselves in to get a compelling image was sometimes obvious, like with this one. And certainly this one. Other images seem uneventful, but the seeming quiet masks the perilousness of the situation for the photographer. After spending a year in the Philippines photographing the Spanish-American War, James Mccalton, the Underwood photographer, traveled to China in 1900 when the anti-foreigner Boxer Rebellion broke out. He photographed throughout China for a year. Many of the images document the ravages of war and the fear felt by European refugees escaping anti-foreigner attacks. Undeterred, Mccalton traveled by small boat into China's interior. At one stopping point, he describes the harrowing experience of being unable to take the image he intended because a mob of the local population gathered and began attacking him and his traveling companions. They were forced to hurriedly retreat to their boat as the crowd threw mud and lumps of clay at them. Mccalton and his comrades were grateful that there were no rocks at hand for the crowd to throw at them. Once safely back at their boat, they got their guns and frightened the crowd back. Then Mccalton gave his gun to a colleague and marched back with his camera to where he had wanted to take the photo before the attack. He hurriedly took his photo. They then fled for their lives. After all of our travels to the far corners of the world, at the end of the day, there's still no place like home. For those of you who have seen my Instagram posts, you know that many of my stereo images are travel related. I have also had several articles published in the International Stereoscopic Union's journal, Stereoscopy. My articles have a travelogue quality to them that resembles the text of the companion books for the box sets. The reason why I photograph in 3D is the same as why I collect what I do, and which inspires my 3D photography in turn. I always envisioned creating my own stereo cards, and have at last begun to think my cards are coming closer to my creative aspirations for them. This is the back of the card. The type of text I added to the back is intended to convey the sense of being there that I so admire in the companion books of the box sets. I have always wanted to include a map with very precise GPS coordinates for the depicted image. It came from my frustration of trying to find places listed in guidebooks. You can see this carried through in my inclusion of a map of where I took the photo and GPS coordinates on the back of my card. If you type the coordinates into a mapping app, especially in satellite mode, you will see exactly where I took the photo. Thank you.